It seems like it's been 40 weeks since you got 40 winks. Your back pain? Unbearable. Tossing, turning, trying to find that pain-free position. And that's the moment you realize you can't spend another waking moment putting off treatment.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for spine care, with a ton of surgical and non-surgical treatments for back pain. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better, the Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 752, The Neurology of Emotional Eating Plus Solutions with Elisabeth Kristof.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Hey friends, before I get into this amazing conversation with Elisabeth Kristof about emotional eating, binge eating, being addicted to sweets and sugar, and some solutions to that, I want to talk to you about my friend Sarah and Team Fit With Me. If you're looking for a great health coach that will help you with nutrition, your physical fitness, whether you have some gut-related issues, you have some hormonal issues, she can do full labs and help you with that. So if you find yourself kind of struggling with your nutrition and your physical fitness, then definitely reach out to Sarah right now. You can get 10% off month one of all packages whenever you go to teamfitwithme.com/poundthis. You'll find that information in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I am Amanda Valentine. Returning guest is Elisabeth Kristof. She was originally on episode 706, which came out in August of 2021, which is we discussed binge eating and your brain and why your brain is telling you to binge, which was a fantastic episode. But you do so much that I'm like, we have to do a deeper dive into some more of these topics. So first off, thank you again so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really excited to dive deeper into this topic of food and the relationship with your body and your nervous system, because it is very layered and there's so many different ways to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me all about, for the people that didn't catch the other episode you on, all about you, your background, and what you do.
So I am the founder of a virtual platform called Brain-Based Wellness, and it is a platform where we basically come together to train the nervous system, to train your nervous system, just like you would train your muscles in the gym, to heal different deficits, to give your brain and your nervous system stimulus that it needs to be stronger and to be more resilient so that you can handle more stress. You can handle change, you can change your behavior, you can level up your business without moving into protective outputs coming from your body and your brain, like binge eating, like migraine, like pain, like fatigue. All of these are outputs done by your brain to keep you safe. And so if we can train your operating system, your nervous system, to feel safer and to be more resilient, then you can move out of those protective modes into a performance mode. And that's really what we do on the site.
So how often do you see people that do have issues so much with emotional eating, which we're going to get into, binge eating, all of these things, and just feel like they hit this roadblock of like, oh, what's wrong with me? And I'm trying to do this and I'm trying to like diet and exercise. And then you don't realize like, hey, we actually have to dig a little deeper and kind of work with how your brain is doing all of these things instead of kind of these like Band-Aids that we're slapping onto it.
I work with people on this issue all the time because it's really near and dear to my heart. Myself, I have struggled with disordered eating most of my life. And it is also the behavior, binge eating, emotional eating, and stress eating was the behavior that led me to learn a lot of the insights and healing modalities that I've now brought into the site. I am someone who comes from a kind of turbulent childhood. I have a pretty high ACE score, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. And so most of my life, without understanding this at the time, I have been a binge eater, or I have emotionally eaten or stress eaten to help regulate myself, to help me manage my emotions. And I started that at a very early age. I was in the health and wellness industry for a long time. I had a couple Pilates studios here in Austin and started studying applied neurology to bring it into our teacher training program, mostly to help people with athletic performance and behavior change. And so I took this deep dive into applied neurology because I really loved it and used it in my studios. But then I hit a period in my own life where things got really, really stressful. I had to dissolve my partnership shares in my business, and my romantic partner at the time was diagnosed with cancer. I went into being a caretaker, and that intense amount of stress brought up a lot of my old past childhood trauma as well. And I moved into a really high state of nervous system dysregulation, and I found myself binge eating a lot, emotionally eating a lot, getting into these really intrusive negative thought loops about my body, experiencing chronic pain. And I had all this background in applied neurology and functional neurology. And I understood the nervous system at a really deep level. And I began to realize that I was recognizing all the signals inside of myself of dysregulation before I would move into these behaviors, before I would have a binge, before I would experience an episode of chronic pain or a migraine. And I started to really take a deep dive into trying to understand how nervous system dysregulation can impact all areas of our life, not just athletic performance, that there was a much broader application to this. And so I then started using these neural exercises and these tools for self-regulation to change my own behavior, to change my own relationship with my body and with food. And food was really my portal to that, going through my disordered relationship to food and my painful relationship to my body was what led me down the path of understanding all of that. And so a lot of my programs deal specifically with people who have never been able to move out of emotional eating, who have never been able to move out of stress eating. And so I'd love to just keep diving more today into emotional eating and what is really going on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I relate to this so hard too, because I am also working through those things. I think that we've discussed last time we had this discussion that I also have a high ACE score. I'm like an 8 out of 10, which is pretty intense. And then, working through that where I've been diagnosed of, a binge eating disorder, and how I find myself at times of very high stress or very high emotions or menstrual cycles going into having emotional eating and working myself through that, which is still a process that I am working myself in, and why I love having these discussions of not only learning that about myself, but helping other people, because I feel like so many times we don't make these associations with each other, that we don't realize, oh, I'm just having a stressful day. That means I want to eat. You're not tying it to some of the things that you've been through or how you're connecting that together. So definitely, let's discuss, just emotional eating, I guess, from a neurology standpoint, where we think of I'm happy, I'm stressful, I'm sad, I want to eat, but why is that connection being made?
Yeah. So just briefly, before we dive too much more into the emotional eating, to touch a little bit more on the ACE scores, one of the things that I learned as I was going through all of this research was that truly emotional eating, stress eating, binge eating were saving my life at some points. There is an ACE study that happened early on, I think it was in the 90s, with a Dr. Vincent Folletti, and thing from divorce or neglect or sexual abuse or physical abuse, having a caretaker that has addiction issues. There's, multiple different ways. Even it can just be little instances of being perceived that your needs are, or having the perception that your needs are not being met over time, right? Mm-hmm. Neglect, isolation. And what happens is that people with these ACE scores and these adverse childhood experiences have a much higher rate of disease later in life. There are much higher rates of suicide, of addiction, but also of cancer, of autoimmune disease. And I began to realize that the way that I used food to regulate my nervous system to literally upregulate my calm and respond, my rest and digest system, was actually bringing me out of that high stress state, that constant fight or flight, where all that adrenaline and all that cortisol is pumping through my body, and that those chemicals can be really harmful. Too much cortisol for too long can damage your blood vessels, it can damage your arteries, and it can lead to a disease state inside of the body, a disease state that dysregulates your immune system and causes inflammation. And so my body and my nervous system intuitively figured out how to bring me down out of that state, because I was stuck there from having so much stress as a little kid that didn't have the tools to move it through my body, to process it, and to re-regulate. And so it learned to use food, and that's a very natural, normal way to do that. And I actually became profoundly grateful to have that tool, because there are a lot of other people who experience those traumas and that much dysregulation that didn't figure out how to use food as a tool for self-regulation, and they got really sick, and they also had more severe mental issues. And I was able to stay a pretty high functioning person despite this issue with food. And I do believe that at a deep level, my body was absolutely doing the best that it could to keep me safe and to keep me regulated, and that it was a useful tool for a long time. But eventually it became really painful. Eventually it was, moving out of alignment with the things that I wanted to achieve in my life. And it was re-triggering these loops of shame, of deprivation, of scarcity, of all of that, the diet culture loops. And so I wanted to move out of it, but I had to learn new tools to regulate my body, to regulate my nervous system, so that I could do that without causing harm to my body. So I think it's really important that people understand that if you do feel driven into these behaviors, there is a reason. Our brain and our nervous system and our body, are not our cognitive brain, but our old brain, is always making decisions with our survival first. And its primary job is to decide safe or unsafe, and then generate an output in alignment with whatever decision it makes. And so the first step in all of this, before you can start to process emotions, before you can start to move through some of these other behaviors, is to get the tools to create safety inside of your own body, to make it safe to be in your body, to come out of a dissociated state, and to regulate your nervous system. New tools to regulate your nervous system so that you don't have to go back to these old behaviors.
So what are some of those tools?
So there's a bunch of different ways that you can regulate your nervous system. And one of my main goals is to just teach people how to be the expert of your own nervous system, and just teach you a little bit about what your nervous system is. How do you even tell if something is affecting you negatively or positively? So you always want to start to assess and reassess when you're working with your body, and start to look for signs of threat. So some good signs to look for that would tell you that you're moving into more of a threat response would be like that your mouth dries up, or that your palms get really sweaty, or that your shoulders start to creep up by your ears, your heart starts racing, or maybe even that you feel dissociated from your body. You can't feel what's going on inside your body anymore. You feel heavy, you feel brain fog. These things start to happen. That's something that is too much for your nervous system. And just be aware of that, and then start to think of things and find things that your nervous system responds really well to. It could be some neural exercises that I teach on my site, like vagus nerve stimulus, or respiration exercises, or body mapping exercises. But it could also be something simple, like take your shoes off and put your feet in the dirt. And ground yourself by connecting to the earth, or go for a walk out in nature, or take a hot bath and listen to some frequencies that make you feel calm, or as simple as taking a couple straw breaths, breathing in through your nose and then taking a nice long, slow exhale, really making your exhalation twice as long as your inhalation, and just start to get curious and start to try to explore and find out what makes your nervous system feel good, and what can you use in the moment of stress to re-regulate yourself. And like I said, on my site, I teach a bunch of neural exercises. I have a free video series that'll give you a bunch of exercises on the site that you can use, but you can also just start to explore in your life, maybe put on a song and dance around, maybe shake your body and move some of that energy through. So just being aware of the threat signals is step one, and then starting to explore and learning what your body responds well to is what you would do next.
So as a person who tries to practice those things, because again, I agree 1,000% of being thankful of that. My coping mechanism was food, of like, it was a smart thing for me to do. And I am no way angry at myself for making those choices. But again, that kind of gets in the way of some of my goals and noticing some of the things that are problematic about that. So when I feel like that high state of emotion, that I want to reach for food, but I try to practice some of the things like straw breathing. And so it works sometimes. So it's like, why do I fight myself knowing that some of these things are incredibly helpful? Like, I'm feeling high levels of stress. That means shut down, take care of yourself in a different way, go for a walk. For me, I really need like alone time, like recharge time. And I know those things are helpful, but for some reason, I'll still not choose that and will still choose food because it feels like it's such an old ingrained pattern in me. So it feels like this fight of knowing some of these other tools work and sometimes work better, but it's like that will come up and I'm like, yeah, no, we're eating instead. So it's like, how do we deal with, or one, why do we do that? And two, like, how do we deal with like this internal war that's so much just, your brain fighting with itself is what it feels like anyway.
Yeah. I think that's very, very common and very relatable, and something that I struggled with my whole life as well. And I think this issue really has three parts, right? There's the nervous system part and creating safety in your own body. There's the component of not being able to process emotions because emotions are too big and scary, and we live in a really emotionally numbed out society where we are often taught at a very early age, from the ages of 0 to 7, that it is not safe to express our emotions. So maybe we learn that when we express our anger, we get sent to our room, we get punished, we get isolated. Maybe we feel the stress that our emotions bring onto our caregivers, and that then stresses us out and dysregulates us. So we start to develop this belief that my emotions are too big, I'm too needy, and if I can just dampen that down, I won't stress other people out, people that at that age you're dependent upon for your survival. And we get these deep beliefs baked in that it's not okay to express our emotions. And then that's confirmed by our society. And so we start to lose the ability to feel, experience, and process these emotions, which I think we'll definitely talk more about in a second. But so there's the nervous system dysregulation, there's the emotional processing, and then there's the subconscious narratives that go on at the level of our subconscious mind. And again, these things are all baked in at a very early age, and they are also there for our survival, but they become harmful over time because they're just not serving us anymore. So self-sabotage is a huge subconscious script that comes from a number of reasons when we start to think about food. Maybe it comes because you're afraid of losing your social connections. We're social animals, and we're really wired to want to stay a part of the tribe for our survival. We want to stay connected to our herd. And maybe with all of your friends, what you relate to is talking about food and your body and diet culture. So when you try to move out of those patterns, you feel like you're going to lose the common thread between you and your friends, and that doesn't feel safe. You're losing your social network. So your brain will let you go so far with it, but then it will sabotage you and bring you back into the behavior. Or maybe you feel at a deep level that there are certain people that are going to resent you and be angry with you as you start to make these changes. And so there's that part of us deep inside that is deeply afraid of the conflict, deeply afraid of disappointing or hurting other people, and maybe even thinks like, my desires are too much. If I go for my desires, I will end up hurting other people that I love. And so our brain allows us to go to a certain extent, but it reins us back at a very deep instinctual level. It threatens your, so again, you can get to a certain point with it, and then your subconscious mind feels too threatened, and it will rope you back into old behaviors that are protecting you at that deep subconscious level. So there's the level of nervous system regulation, There's the level of having to learn how to process and deal with our emotions in another way, and that it's safe to express emotions, and how do we move those through our body. And then there's how do we pull the unconscious up to the conscious, examine it, and then also move those beliefs through the body too.
So obviously step one is just even recognizing that you're doing that. So then how do you really go through the process of working through that when there really is that like threat and fear of losing your connections, your friends, your family? Because as a person who has made drastic changes in my life, you absolutely lose people in the process. And it's really painful, but it's going to the process of like where you have to choose you versus everybody else. But when you're not used to doing that, especially, and from my own case, being a chronic people pleaser, I can see where it's like you get to that roadblock and it's like, well, it's either me or them. And you usually be like, it's more comfortable to choose them. So how do you actually make that progress if it is too hard?
Yeah, it's really true what you're saying. Like our relationships will change, and that feels very scary, especially to the fragments of ourself that are unhealed and wounded little children still. So between the ages of 0 to 7 is when a lot of these beliefs get baked in, because if you think about it, as infants and as small children, we are entirely dependent upon our caregivers for survival. And so we are always looking to them to get our needs met. And there will be times where we don't get our needs met, whether that's the need for attention, the need for social connection, the need for physical touch, the need for actual nourishment, the need to be able to fully express ourselves and our emotions and be supported and held and cared for. And some of us experience that lack of getting our needs met more, but we all experience it at some point. And at that point, it is actually more adaptive as this little being to decide that the world is predictable, but if I change something about myself, I can ensure that I get my needs met. I can stay safe, rather than saying like, well, I am divine and worthy and perfect and whole, but the world is unpredictable. I never know what I'm going to get. I don't know if I'm going to survive, but I'm just going to keep being myself. Instead, we don't really have the ability, even as a young child, to not take it personally, to not try to change ourselves to make sure that we get our needs met. And so these beliefs, these deep core beliefs and core wounds get baked in very, very strongly into our subconscious mind, because our soul and our body and everything is relying on them to keep us safe and to keep us alive. So if my desires are too much, if I just suppress that and put other people ahead of myself, I will stay safe. I won't be abandoned. I won't be socially rejected. If my emotions are too big and they scare other people or dysregulate other people, if I just keep suppressing those, I will stay safe and I will be accepted and I won't be rejected. So it's this deep script, and it's very threatening at the level of our body and our nervous system to try to move beyond that. And so how do we? And there's two things that I think are really important. And one is just a regular practice of working with your nervous system to make it more regulated. So don't wait until you're at the point where you have to engage in the new behavior or set the boundary or claim your sovereignty or make a decision for yourself when it feels really scary. Instead, if you can develop a daily practice of even like 10 minutes a day, training the different components of your nervous system and bringing yourself into a more regulated state, those changes are going to start to stick over time. The different components of your nervous system will get stronger and function better. So, training your eyes, your visual system, training the balance system in your inner ear, training your body mapping system so that your brain knows where you are in space and feels safer on a second by second basis, upregulating your vagus nerve so that your brain is getting better signals from inside of your body of what's going on. And if you can make time daily to do this, to heal your unique deficits and to work directly with your nervous system, then the overall threat level that you're under on a second by second basis goes down. And when that goes down, you can handle more stress without moving into the self-sabotage, without moving into the unwanted behaviors. So like you said, like there are times when you know you need to do that, but you don't want to. It's like if during the times when we're not in that high stress state, we can work on training our nervous system, then we won't move into that behavior as quickly when we get to that place where it is really scary. And then the other really important thing is I always teach my clients to find a couple really high payoff, very simple neural exercises that their body responds well to. So maybe it's doing some tongue circles to activate your vagus nerve, just running your tongue over your teeth and underneath your lips and going a little further back each time. Maybe there's a certain breathing pattern that really calms them down. Maybe it's just sensory stimulus for their hands and creating an image of where their hands are in space, something that really makes them feel calm. And then as you're confronted with these difficult situations where you have to choose yourself or you have to move in the direction of a new belief that goes against that old core wound, a belief of I am worthy of time and care, or my voice deserves to be heard, I deserve to be seen, visibility serves the world, all of these new beliefs, as you're taking actions in the real world that align with those new beliefs, before and after you take the action, do some neural exercises to calm your nervous system down. So before you do it, a couple neural exercises. Take the action. After you do it, a couple neural exercises, so that you are re-regulating your body around taking that action, and you're continuing to teach your body and your subconscious mind it is safe. It's safe to act in accordance with this new belief. I have a felt sense of safety inside of myself after taking this new action. And the more you do that, the more you couch it in this stimulus and these exercises that create that sense of safety, the more regularly you can take that action without moving into threat.
Well, such good news, where I feel like in my experience talking through to so many people personally and professionally, it's like, I'm an emotional eater as a statement, as if there's no cure for that, as if there's no way you can work through it. It's just a fact about me. When I get stressed or I feel an emotion, I eat, period. And this basically says, like, no, that doesn't have to be what you do if you don't choose it to be that way. If you see this as something problematic for you and you want to change, you can do these sorts of exercises and kind of unprogram that behavior so you can stop identifying as an emotional eater.
Yeah, when I first started trying to process my emotions, because I had learned enough to understand that that was really important, that, we are physiological beings and emotions are not just in our mind, they're actual physical experiences in our body. They're hormones and chemicals and energy and electrical charges that run through our body, and they're meant to be expressed. And our animal body, our body understands how to process those emotions. It understands how to discharge that energy and release it. But because our society is so against expressing emotions for the most part, and because we have these deep core beliefs that are baked in at an early age, we forget how to do it, and it feels really scary to do it. And so we, instead of allowing our body to process it through, we just hold on to all of that emotional energy inside of us, and we feel it in our muscle tension, we feel it in gut issues, we feel it in the clenching of our jaw, but it doesn't feel safe to release it. And so I was learning enough to understand, hey, it's really important that I start moving these emotions through me and not just shoving them down with food and not just bottling up inside my body. But it was scary. And as I started to allow myself, like as I would actually physically like push the food away and try to, do some somatic practices like tapping or some somatic movement to let the emotion come through, my body did not respond well because I was so scared. My joints would swell up. I would get eczema. I would feel really heavy. Sometimes I would get a really bad migraine. My body just didn't feel like it was safe. And what I also saw as a practitioner of functional neurology is, hey, these are protective outputs. These are protective outputs of my nervous system when it feels like something is too much and too dysregulating. So how do I make it safe? So before I started trying to process my emotions, I would do 2 or 3 drills for my breath, for my vagus nerve, for my sensory systems. And then I would practice a minimum effective dose of emotional expression. So like 30 seconds of allowing myself to feel into my grief, to breathe into it, to just say, okay, body, it's safe to release, maybe while I did some EFT tapping or something. And then I would let just a little bit come out. And then I would re-regulate with some more neural drills that made my nervous system feel safe. And then the next time I would go a little bit further and a little bit further. And I learned more somatic processes, more ways of repatterning my body, and practices like screaming into a pillow and punching a pillow and letting my anger come out of me. But I had to work up to that, and I had to keep creating safety in my body, keep re-regulating my nervous system in order for that to not re-traumatize me over and over again. So now I'm pretty good at letting the emotions move through my body, and I've been able to go back to some really old wounds and discharge the emotion for that version of myself, so that I no longer have to eat when I experience something that re-triggers that emotion. But it is a process, and it has to be really gradual, and you have to keep putting safety in the body at the forefront of that process.
So I know that's going to be completely different for every individual, but like what kind of time frame did that work on you and for the clients that you see? Because I wanted to ask this because we come from such an impatient culture, as well as we want this immediate gratification that, I can't imagine it's going to be like, hey, 2 months later, my problems are solved. I don't have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah, it really depends. And some people have been doing so much work on themselves for so long, they're able to get back to that really deep place pretty quickly and move it through their bodies. And once you really move that emotion through your body, you don't have to keep revisiting it over and over again. You don't have to keep processing and processing. It is like you will get to a place where you really do release it and you can move on with your life. But it takes time, especially for those of us who have been really dissociated and really disconnected from our body for a long time, to be able to get there. So for me, it took a couple of years. It really took a couple of years of practice before I could get to that deepest root level. And for a lot of my clients, it takes at least 3 to 6 months before they can really start to feel the signals inside of their body, and they can really actually start letting those emotions come through safely without re-triggering a protective response. And then it's layered, right? So we have like different layers of things. And so it's taken me a little, like I could get to where I could express my anger in a current situation, and I could express my grief for like recent things, but it took longer for me to get to some of the deeper stuff that I've been holding for a really long time without facing too much resistance inside my body and too much chatter inside my mind, and just freeze, dissociation, and shutdown. That one took a little bit longer.
So is this something that you walk people through? I mean, tell me about all of your services and how you help people deal with this.
Yeah. So we don't, on the site, we just do movement and nervous system training, but I do have a food freedom program, and I do private training where we really dive into all of this. So first we start by creating safety in the body, starting to learn to read the signals that your body is sending you, learning drills to help you regulate so that you can move out of the behavior. And then we move into emotional processing and making it safe to process emotions, expressing our grief, especially expressing our rage. Those are two emotions that are really held in. And the thing about suppressing emotions is that when we numb out some of our emotions with food, with scrolling on Instagram, with TV, with all the things that we do, with overtraining, whatever it is, we're numbing out all of them, because emotions are all attached on one big spectrum. So you can't block out your grief without also numbing out your joy. You can't block out your anger without also diminishing your excitement and your power. And so not only do we use food to suppress the negative emotions, but then also cravings comes a lot from trying to get the positive emotions that we need, that we've numbed out, that feeling of connection, or the feeling of excitement, or the feeling of relaxation that we're no longer able to access because everything is just numbed out and shut down. And so we start to work with pulling the cravings for food out and pulling the emotions out of the food. So what do I want to experience in my life? Well, I want more relaxation. I want more excitement. I want more social connection. And I'm trying to get that from this York peppermint patty, but it can't do that, right? Like that was a big thing for me. I always, when I was bored and tired and burnt out, I would always want to eat a bunch of York peppermint patties. And I realized like they give me this feeling of like fun and play and excitement. And so if I started to pull that out and be like, I really need that in my life. I really need less time working and more play and more fun and excitement. I would pull it out of the food and start to bring it into my own life. And so we do a lot of experiencing emotions, whether that's joy, whether that's anger, whether that's grief, and just becoming human beings that are able to express and feel and move through the full spectrum of emotions. And then we also take a deep look at what's going on inside of the subconscious mind. Why isn't it safe to move out of these behaviors? Is it trouble with boundary setting? Do I need to work on claiming my sovereignty of my body and my energy? Is it codependent relationship patterns? Is it fear of being isolated from the herd? Is it past sexual trauma that's unresolved? What's going on underneath that's keeping us in this behavior? And then finally doing the work to really process that through the body and re-regulate our nervous system around that processing.
So 2 things. One, coming back to your peppermint patty, would you say that's also where so many people, I've also, in my experience, have been like, I have a sugar addiction. I'm addicted to sugar and sweets. Is that pretty much kind of tied into this? Is that same sort of tie of like sweets and the sugar in cakes and candies kind of highlight, again, what they're lacking, and that's why there's a quote unquote sugar addiction?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have these memories that we bake into the food, memories of fun social connection, maybe a family member that you feel really tied to, or a fun experience, or a time when you got attention, or a time it just feels exciting, maybe even a little bit forbidden. And we don't get enough of that in our own life. We don't express our desires. We don't have the social connection that we want. We don't allow ourselves to play. And so we end up really needing it from our food. And that's the only way that it feels safe to experience those emotions if we're really emotionally shut down. And then it's like, yeah, then we get really angry when we're like, you're going to take that away from me. It's the only way I can relax. That's the only way I can have fun. And so there's all this inner resistance to giving that up because we feel so deprived of those emotions and experiences, and we hold so many memories inside of it that we don't want to let go of. And until we do, though, we can't really create that in our real life.
So my second question is, feel free to give me a brutal analysis here. One of the things that I do, I regulate myself with is caffeine, which is a dangerous game. But one of them being, where I interact with a lot of people on a daily basis. And if I am having a bad day where I just feel like I can't sit in those emotions of being upset or angry or depressed or sad, because I also deal with depression, I'm like, I can't go and train 9 people today one-on-one and be who I need to be for them if I'm in this bummer ass mood. So then I will just crank the caffeine to try to get to myself to this like elevated happy level so I can be that for other people, and then just crash hard after that. And so it's like, I know that's a vicious cycle, and I'm not sure how to work through that, but I'm sure, what's your advice? Tell me what's wrong with me.
Nothing is wrong with you. I'm right there with you. I completely understand. And I think a lot of us are afraid of like opening the lid on these emotions because we have a life to lead, right? We have things to show up, and there's a lot of layered things going on there. Like one is that like there's just this culture of like I have to show up for work and hustle culture, and I've got to like put everybody else's needs ahead of my own. And if I'm really experiencing something, why isn't it okay to just take a pause for today and say like I need to rest? That's a whole other issue. But the thing is that like we think that if we open the lid to these emotions, we're going to be incapacitated for days or weeks. But the truth is emotions can be processed through the body pretty quickly if we allow them to move through. So the more we get used to letting these emotions move through us, actually the less time it takes and the less overwhelming it is. And that, the safer it becomes for our bodies to do that, then we don't get stuck in these long periods of grief, or we don't get re-triggered in this same way. So when something's been suppressed for a long time, that's a lot of times when our emotional reactivity is disproportionate to what's really happening, right? Because say something little happens in life, like your partner looks at you just a certain way, or somebody sets their keys down in an aggressive way, and it triggers in you the emotional flashback that's there, the suppressed emotion that those other fragments of yourself that have been unresolved or holding on to for so long. And then it's this overwhelming emotion of insecurity, of grief, of abandonment, of loneliness that doesn't really match what's going on in the real world at all, but it's just been unprocessed. So yes, it's mucky and messy when we actually process through it, but the more we let ourselves actually process through it, the less re-triggered we become in that disproportionate response. And then the more we can move things through ourselves really quickly. And to be really transparent, I have had something pretty deep coming up for me lately. And it really came up this morning. I think it was the snowstorm and being isolated in my house. And it just triggered a flood of things. And before we got on this call, I did some processing and I screamed and I cried and I tapped and I moved things. And now I'm better. And it took 30 minutes. And now I can show up on this call and be really present with you, because I felt that I was moving into dissociation. I felt that I was really irritable. And I was like, I can't go on with my day like this. Actually, now for me, it has become, I have to process this through so that I can be really present with the people that I'm serving, so that I can be connected and not leave the building.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's awesome. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's incredibly helpful. I think so also, for people that are professionals, in a health and wellness space, to understand that like it's not like everybody has it all figured out. And it's like, yeah, you have those emotions and you still have to work through those. It's like not this social media perfection of like, oh, I figured this all out and I'm in a happy, shiny mood like all the time, of like, no, sometimes I lay on the floor and I scream and I cry.
Yeah.
And so,
I would say like the difference for me today is that I went through a lot of my life emotionally numb, and then having these periods of really intense emotional flashbacks where I would get shut down with pain, with migraine, with a binge, with dissociation for a couple days at a time. And now I pretty easily allow myself to experience emotions. There's still a little bit of resistance, but I have these tools to regulate myself before and after. And my body has relearned, it has remembered how to do that. And so it will move that through me. And I have a very different experience of life. I can feel the sun on my skin. I can be connected to other people. I can experience like real moments of joy and connection, as well as experiencing the grief and letting the anger out. But of course, there's always still emotions in life. And it's not always like love and light 100% of the time. Like sometimes I have rage and sometimes I have deep sadness, but that's all beautiful. It's all a beautiful part of the human experience. And now I get to experience it.
So what do you feel like your relationship with food is now?
I feel like for the most part, I eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full, and I use food for pleasure. Sometimes I go out in social situations and it's fun to eat a really nice meal. It's fun to eat some ice cream, to go out with my boyfriend and have an ice cream and go to the beach or something. Like that's fun and it's great. And I honestly don't think about it after that. And so to me, that's what freedom really is. And every once in a while, there's a time when I use food to self-regulate, and I have a lot of trauma, and sometimes that's the best I can do, but it's very few and far between. And the difference for me with that today too is that I don't care. I'm just like, that's okay. That was the best that I could do in that moment. It's not a big deal. I have a beam. I'll get back on the beam. I'm gentle with myself about it. And it's just one day. It's just one possible output of my nervous system. It's fine. And it's an okay tool for self-regulation sometimes, if that's what our body needs, until we keep learning more tools and it becomes more safe to go through whatever it is.
That's amazing. So if somebody is listening to this and it's really hitting home and resonating, what are all of the tools that you offer? How can they get in contact with you and take advantage of some of these things so we can start working through this process?
The best place to find me is through my website, which is brainbased-wellness.com. And I have some free tools for food freedom to regulate your nervous system around food and to start to look for those threat signals. So those are available there. I also have a free video series that'll just teach you more about applied neurology and a couple really simple, really practical neural exercises that you can implement in the moment of stress to try to move out of that behavior. And they will not take you longer than 30 seconds to do. So it's a great place to get started. And then you can reach out to me if you want more about our food freedom program. You can reach out to me more about private training, but start with those and see how it feels in your body, if it makes sense, if it resonates with you, and then take it from there.
Awesome. Well, I could have this conversation like literally all day. Like, I just think this stuff is like just so important and so amazing. So thank you again for coming on the podcast again. I'll put all of that information in the show notes, and you're definitely welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much for having me.
AmandaValentineBites.com